as Verena was mentioning, the meeting is gonna be recorded. So, okay, I have a problem. I see, but I hope you don't see the meeting is being recorded on the screen. Do you see it?
No.
Okay, good, because this is in the middle of my slide at the moment. So as Verena was saying, the meeting will be recorded. So if this is for you a problem, please leave the meeting. Today we have an interesting discussion on open source solution. We have a presentation from Eclipse on the future of software development. We have a presentation on from OpenNebula on the cloud edge orchestration, and finally a presentation from the Open Source Business Alliance on the sovereign cloud stack, which is of course very linked to GaiaX initiatives, as you may imagine. Before going into this set of interesting presentation, let me just go very quickly through few of the findings that we believe are important target for open source community that we had analyzed in the project. So first of all, we all know that there is an exponential growth of data, and clearly the place where data is generated is not the cloud in many scenario, but is on-premise location and what is usually called the edge. And with this growing proportion of data generated at the edge, clearly is bringing up some challenges. Moving data from the edge to the data center is inefficient for several reasons in terms of time, cost, energy, and many other related reasons. Of course, there is now this means that we have having a shift from the center of gravity from the cloud intended as a centralized data center toward the edge and toward more distributed infrastructure. And this is clearly a challenge that needs to be tackled at different levels. So for the cloud provider, for the provider of on-premise solution, for the telco, and so on and so forth. This is clearly a transformational change. And also eventually what is the outcome is that in the end we will have a solution that are not anymore just cloud to edge or cloud to cloud, but more toward edge to edge. And clearly we see this as an important shift, and we believe that even open source solution need to be ready for this shift. One of the clearly ways you can even work on this type of networked peer-to-peer solution is clearly the federation aspect. And we know that there are several type of federated models. Some are very simple, like the open marketplace, which is probably the starting type of solution that is available already in some integration solution like the Cloud 28 by Hewlett-Packard. And then there are, of course, more integrated solution. From the point of view of complexity, of course, the full integrated solution is the one that requires more effort, but is also truly that is the one that is going to be more providing more added value to potential end users. So this is also why we think initiative as GaiaX might provide value in this direction, and that they have a certain relevant, and this needs to be as well supported in open source ecosystem. There is also linked to that another interesting discussion, which is how you work on energy efficiencies. And of course, we know that hyperscaler with the very large data center are very good at doing energy efficiency, and also having a ability to source energy from green sources. Things get a bit more complex for smaller cloud service provider. And when you have in-house data center, the thing is even more complex, and it's all to be explored when you move toward the edge. And given that today the edge is mostly often is a private infrastructure, this is really something that needs to be understood and studied very well, also especially at the network level. We believe there are many places where you can bring innovation at this stack, and it is important to explore that to ensure that edge computing is not becoming a way to increase the carbon footprint in the digital ecosystem. And yeah, we are curious today to hear about what different open source initiatives are doing around edge computing, around federation and similar stuff. And I give the floor to the Eclipse Foundation. So I stop sharing, and if I manage, because, oh boy, okay, I think it worked out.
Okay, thank you very much, Federico, and thank you to the HCloud community for providing me the opportunity to present today. My name is Brian King, and I'm the community manager for the Cloud Dev Tools Working Group at Eclipse Foundation. So let me just share my screen and get things set up. All right, is my screen visible?
Yes, all good.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so, you know, the title of this presentation that you might have seen in promotional materials was the future of software development is happening now. And I explain what I mean by that as we go through. The future is always now, right, for anything. I work at the Eclipse Foundation, and we're organized as working groups. And the focus today will really be on the Cloud Dev Tools Working Group, the one that I'm involved in. But you know, I want to also lead in with a little bit about open source and a little bit about what we're doing in general at the Eclipse Foundation, because I think it's important to set the context around what we do as an open source foundation. And, you know, the Cloud Dev Tools Working Group is really a microcosm of how the organization works in general. A lot of the stuff I will be talking about is you know, as the saying goes, preaching to the converted. I'm sure most of you are open source folks. So I will go through it quickly and get onto the good stuff fast enough. Okay, so, you know, obviously some numbers. We're seeing huge growth in adoption of open source. And in a sense, you know, we like to say open source has won. However, I think we can never take it for granted. There's always threats to open source. We're seeing recently, you know, the locking down of some projects under, I don't even know what the licenses are called, but more restrictive open licenses that don't fully comply with OSI criteria. That's fine, but you know, as long as we don't allow it to be pervasive and you know, take over the whole industry. So you know, these numbers are a little bit out of date, but I think they're worth repeating. You know, 81% of companies, for example, are consuming open source products and services. So it's really prevalent throughout the industry. Quite a large number of them are contributing upstream, and nearly all of them are reporting productivity gains from that. So why are organizations working in open source? There's a few reasons. Of course, good corporate citizenship. You know, you can promote your accomplishments and demonstrate goodwill towards the rest of the industry. Accelerating innovation. So, you know, when you share the costs of innovation, especially, you know, around the core capabilities that you don't need to build yourself, time to market can be faster. Not always, but it can be. To participate in open collaboration, you know, that might be an obvious one, but for many organizations, that was a huge culture shift. But I think that's the way that most organizations are going nowadays. And of course, to safeguard investments, right? If you're consuming open source, the best way really to safeguard your investments is to participate in it, right? To take part in the project governance, for example, to make sure you have a say in the future of the project, or just purely financial resources. And of course, it mitigates business risks, right? If you choose the right open source projects that are well managed, that look after intellectual property, and so on, the business risks are lessened. And research has suggested, of course, that, you know, if you are a good open source corporate citizen, that you're able to attract and retain top talent, which is a huge problem in the tech industry now, and I imagine across multiple industries these days. So I'm sure, you know, a lot of this you've heard before, but as I said, I think it's worth stressing and worth reminding ourselves. So I want to move on and talk about the Eclipse Foundation and how we work and why we exist. So we're community first, community and code first, commercial friendly organization. So all of them are crucial. We've been around for 17 years. Most of you might know us for the Eclipse IDE, which is still one of the most popular Java development environments. It's used with many other programming languages and in many other environments as well. However, over the last 17 years, and especially in the last 5 years, the foundation has changed enormously, which I will talk about in a moment. But how do we compare in terms of other ways of managing or approaching open source? So, you know, if we take GitHub as an example, it's a fantastic resource for developers and for organizations. However, there's some features that it doesn't provide yet. In particular, things like vendor neutral governance and business friendly IP and licensing. So, you know, on the latter, you know, you hear, you know, quite regularly now about projects being taken down from GitHub because of, you know, certain market pressures that is applied to GitHub, or because, you know, their licensing just isn't set up correctly. With Eclipse, you know, we look after all that for you and make sure that the project isn't under threat from that perspective. Single vendor open source, that's a good option as well. However, you know, it's not trivial to govern and to provide the technical resources for an open source project. It's not a matter, as you know, of just throwing the source code up there and hoping everything will happen magically, right? Organic growth in an open source project will only get you so far. So the Eclipse Foundation, we really look after the whole life cycle of open source, from building the developer community promoting high quality code. We provide marketing services to drive adoption and monetization, predictive processes, vendor neutral governance, as I said, and we look after IP and licensing. So as I said, we're best known for the Eclipse IDE. However, today we have over 380 open source projects under the Eclipse Foundation. We have 330 members from across multiple industries, over 1,600 committers to our projects. We're pretty lean in terms of staff, which is around 40 staff members. So we very much rely on the community, like any open source organization. And working groups, which I'll talk about more, we have 16. These are the kind of the four broad areas in which we're organized. It's not strictly limited to these four areas. So for example, I'm not sure if there's a mention of AI here and other fields, but you know, cloud native Java, you know, we've always been working very closely with the Java ecosystem and Java developers. IoT and edge, automotive, and tools, which I will be focusing on a little bit later. And you know, as this community and this meetup is all about the cloud, you will know just by looking at these that all of these areas now rely heavily on cloud and cloud development tools. So these are just some of our projects. So for cloud native development, Jakarta EE is very important. It's you know, next generation Java runtime. Closely related, we have you know, projects like MicroProfile. IOFog is one of our most popular projects in IoT, and Eclipse Thea, which I'll be talking about later, is an IDE platform for software developers. So just some highlights there. Very vibrant community of independent developers and organizations. Our core services, you know, I referred to these a little bit earlier, but just to make them clear, governance and processes, ecosystem development and marketing. So, you know, we don't just take in projects and let them wither on the vine, right? We put real resources behind them to shine a light on them and increase adoption in the marketplace. IP management and licensing, and of course, providing infrastructure. So infrastructure around source code hosting, around cloud hosting, around development tools. That's all looked after in the Eclipse Foundation. In this really crowded mass of logos, you might find some you recognize. I don't believe these are all our members. These are just some of them. And, you know, it's growing all the time. Every week we have new members joining the Eclipse Foundation. They're joining for various reasons. They're joining to bring their projects to the Eclipse Foundation. They're joining to taking part in working groups, industry working groups, so they can have some influence there. They're joining as adopters, using our projects and our code in their products, and so on. And I would say this information here is familiar to you as well, in that, you know, on scale, this I think it's how open source should work, right? You know, if you have the first two layers, the governance layer and the collaboration layer, you know, if you get them right, that's where you, as an organization or an individual, can really bring the innovation on top of that. You know, the secret sauce, and that's the competition layer. Okay, so how do you build on top of open source tools and projects to build a product that's commercially viable in the market and successful in the market? So, you know, you'll see a figure there of 13 billion of shared investment to date. To be honest, I don't know how that number was reached. It sounds like a lot, but you know, it's obviously investment in these projects in terms of people resources and other funding resources, you know, time, that all adds up, and you know, companies continue to invest in open source and in the Eclipse Foundation. So working groups is primarily how we're organized, and I think it's important to talk about this just for a moment. So we're a platform for entrepreneurial open source. It benefits companies across multiple industries of all sizes. Got a very, very business-friendly reputation. You know, I've been around in open source for many years, and how I started out was just doing hobby projects and scratching an itch and fixing small things that I was interested in, and I wasn't necessarily interested in the value it provided to a wider industry. But you know, obviously over the years, it's become more and more important in the enterprise sphere. We reinvest everything into our projects and our developer community. The key approach are the working groups. And, you know, as I said, they provide an open and vendor neutral governance framework to engage in collaborative development. Okay. The other thing worth calling out here, not to repeat myself, is, you know, we really want to extend best practices of the Eclipse development process in our working groups. And we want to support the shared development of requirements, specifications, marketing strategy, test environments, security policies, and so on. So it's more than just the code; it's the whole life cycle of software development. Key functions of our working groups. So requirements gathering, creating and committing to long-term multi-project roadmaps. So when we bring new members on board, you know, we want them to have a vision, not just for the next 6 months, but for the next 3 to 5 years. There's a lot of architectural discussions and collaboration across open source projects, testing and certification of industry platforms, funding of joint development, and ecosystem and community development. I think the key here is collaboration. When you come in and you take part in Eclipse Foundation working group, you only really get out of it what you put in, right? I think that's the general rule across open source in general. And here's our working groups at a glance. So, you know, I've mentioned IoT and Sparkplug and Edge working groups. In automotive, we have OpenADX, OpenMobility, Jakarta EE, MicroProfile in the Java space, and so on. So, you know, we're adding new working groups all the time. We think it's a model that scales. We think it's a model that gives organizations, large and small, the opportunity to participate. You know, our membership structure, our membership fees, and everything is really set up that any organization can come in, large or small, and participate on an equal footing. So on to the Cloud DevTools working group and what we do here. So our mission is to define and build an ecosystem of best-in-class open source web and cloud-based development tools, and to promote and drive the broad adoption of these tools. You know, software moving to the cloud has been happening for a number of years now, across multiple fields. It's also been happening for 5 to 7 years in terms of software developer tools. However, it's really accelerated in the last 2 to 3 years. And that's why the working group was set up. We've got some very compelling projects. And with our track record in developer tools, we feel it's something that we can really, a space that we can really contribute to. So, just to clarify, what do I mean by cloud development tools? It's tools for software development that run in the cloud and for the cloud, right? And there's going to be some, crossover with developing tools for other software environments, like for example, in the embedded device space. Our tools are becoming quite popular at the moment, and they're obviously still based locally in terms of development. So it's interesting to see use cases like that. Our members are made up of organizations large and small. A lot of these companies have a fantastic track record in open source. All of them, I would say. I wouldn't like to call out any in particular. Company Typefox, who are based in Germany. They founded the Gitpod project, which is a really innovative development environment. They helped found Eclipse project and the OpenVSX project, which I will talk about in a moment. So yeah, all very interesting companies working in very different fields, but with the common goal of bringing best-in-class development tools to the cloud. And jumping right into some of our projects. Now, these are all our projects. And there's 3 in particular that I will talk about today. And these 3 are becoming more and more important, and have really surfaced up to the top. Although the rest of the projects, it's a very diverse group. Most of them are very active projects with very diverse communities. So Eclipse Thea. So think of your classic developer environment, your integrated development environment. So that's your code editor, your debugger, your command line interface. Thea is a platform. I won't say a product, because it's not a product on the market. It is rather a software platform for you to build your products on top of. And it provides all those tools that I mentioned, all in one integrated environment. Most products such as SAP Business Application Studio, Eclipse and Code Ready Workspaces by Red Hat uses Thea. They run in the browser, right? So they run in a cloud environment, and most of them are solving cloud development. The target is also, cloud infrastructure and cloud applications. But interestingly, it turns out that a lot of software development needs are still on the desktop. So, we're really, we saw demand for a desktop version of Eclipse Thea. So born recently was the Thea Blueprint project. It's essentially the same technology. So Thea is built on web technologies such as Node, such as TypeScript, and so on. But the Blueprint is an installer that you can download and run on your desktop. Just some of the organizations contributing to and adopting Eclipse there. In the embedded space, we have companies like Arduino and ARM, Broadcom and IBM are using it for mainframe development. Google has Google Cloud shell editor environment that they built on Eclipse there. So very, very diverse community right now and very popular project. I think, you know, one of the key advantages of Eclipse because it's a platform, you know, you don't just get something out of the box, you get something to build on, right? It's extensible. It's extensible in terms of allowing VS Code extensions to run in Eclipse you know, VS Code extensions, even though they're not a standard, I would say they're kind of a de facto way of adding new features into development environments these days. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But you can it's also highly extensible in terms of adding new features to your IDE, adding your own branding, your own you know, user interface, and so on. Eclipse Che it's a Kubernetes IDE for developer teams. It's the industry's first Kubernetes native IDE to run containers. And it has everything that a cloud native developer needs. And you know, I'm not going to talk to everything in this slide, but just it's kind of a peek on everything it does. So it provides you know, the tools the IDE provides. It provides a build environment or runtime environment for applications, test environment, debug, etc., etc. So right across the board for Kubernetes developers, it provides a great solution. It's also highly extensible, like Eclipse there. And again, many organizations contributing to Eclipse Che. I mentioned OpenVSX and VS Code extensions. So obviously VS Code is a very, very popular developer environment now by Microsoft. It's a fantastic tool. And they have thousands of extensions in their marketplace. The problem was that really became apparent was that because of the licensing of Microsoft's marketplace, these extensions were not available outside of VS Code. It was the only place you could run them, in VS Code or other Microsoft products. So what we did was we built an alternative marketplace called the OpenVS registry. And any tool that supports VS Code extensions can integrate OpenVSX so that users can install and run VS Code extensions. As you know, you know, a lot of innovation happens at the edge, right? It reminds me of, you know, the browser space 10 or 15 years ago. You know, when I was working previously at Mozilla, I was involved heavily in the add-ons ecosystem, and a lot of the features that eventually became integrated into the browser started out as add-ons. I think we're going to see that a lot also in the developer tool space. You know, there's a lot of great things happening by developers out there. Yeah, so, you know, we're just starting out. We already have 1,000 extensions. We're growing every week. All open source and proprietary licenses are allowed. The only requirement is that it has to have some license. And I'd urge you to check out the slides after, click the link here to read our white paper with more information on OpenVSX. And I mentioned embedded earlier, and this is a very interesting use case that popped up recently. It was launched a few months ago, and you know, we really want to promote technical standards in embedded software development, and we want to accelerate the move from desktop to cloud-hosted embedded tools. These are just some of the organizations participating: ARM, Ericsson, Eclipse Source, Renesas, and ST Microelectronics. Okay, So that's almost it. I just want to mention a couple of things we do to really promote thought leadership, because our members and our community are thought leaders in this space. So we urge you to check out some of the things we're doing. We have various collaborative and educational events, such as Cloud Chat, which is casual chat on Twitch TV. We have Cloud Tutorial webinar series. It's an opportunity for our projects and our adopters to talk about their work. Recently, we ran an event called Cloud IDE Day, which various IDE vendors across the whole industry, from companies large and small, attended and participated in. And yeah, Cloud IDE Day videos are up on YouTube, on the Eclipse Foundation YouTube, so I urge you to check them out. Some great talks there. Find out more about what we do. And we also conduct some research. So we fielded a survey on development tools with a particular focus on cloud development tools. And I've seen a preview of some of the results, and it's some surprising stuff in there, very, very interesting. So we're going to be launching our report in the next couple of months. So please check that out. So thank you very much. Find out more about the working group at ecdtools.eclipse.org. We're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and feel free to contact me anytime. I'm easy to find. You can find me on Twitter and around the internet. So thank you again for this opportunity, for talking about what we're doing with cloud development tools and more broadly in the Eclipse Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. I'm now giving the floor to Alberto and Marco to present the activities they run on Cloud Edge orchestration within OpenNebula. Thanks a lot again, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, hello everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. We're really happy to be here and to be sharing this nice event with obviously with all our fellow speakers, but also with the whole audience. I'm sure we'll have very interesting questions later on. So let me share my screen, and we'll talk a bit about the what we've been doing at OpenNebula in the past, well, I'd say 13 years or so, but mainly in the past couple of years, how we've been evolving our technology from being a cloud computing platform to an edge computing platform. So I'm being joined today by my colleague Marco. So here you have our contact details in case you want to follow up with any questions after the event today. Okay, so a bit of background. OpenNebula is a private company. We are based in Europe. We have a headquarters in Madrid. We've been around since 2005, first as a research and development project, then from 2008 onwards, actually as an infrastructure as a service solution with commercial services for mainly customer users who required some support and help in their environments, mainly production environments. We feel really proud of being actually a success story for EU innovation funds. I'd say well invested and with a long-term vision to create something that's sustainable in the long term. We have offices in the Czech Republic as well, and also in the US. And we are also members of a number of open source initiatives like the Linux Foundation and CNCF, and also the European Open Science Cloud, and obviously GaiaX. So we're day one members of GaiaX, and really looking forward to seeing how these initiatives helps the European industry to develop more open source around cloud and edge computing. So as I mentioned, a bit of background, we feel proud of being a European open source project and being able to, as a bootstrapped company, having been able to develop our technology, having the support of the European Commission. We've had the support from the European Commission at different times in history. It's been identified as a flagship of the European Commission investment in open source in Europe, and also as a success story for the 7th Framework Program. And lately, with our edge computing features being identified by the European Innovation Council as well as an interesting use case. So we're happy to be also an inspiration for other companies and also research groups and organizations trying to transform their innovation and research and development into a sustainable commercial enterprise, which is always the kind of this last step that's quite hard to do sometimes. It's not been easy, obviously, but we are still a small company, but we are developing our technology and our use base and customer base, and we are quite happy with how things are going. In 2019, and that's the details Mark is going to explain to you in a second, we received a grant from the European Commission to transform OpenNebula from being a solution for private clouds mainly to something different, to something that was able to actually orchestrate workloads across the cloud and edge continuum. And what we've been doing is incorporating a number of powerful edge computing features into our product. We'll give you some more details in a second, but some of these changes involve, for instance, supporting different kinds of virtualization technologies, supporting containers, application containers as well, and also creating our own model for provisioning resources in different providers, cloud and edge providers. So why edge computing? Obviously, as you all know, this is a new paradigm. It's a kind of a revolution that's going to affect the cloud market, all of the market sooner or later. We have identified this a few years ago, and that's why we applied for this support from the Commission. We know and we expect this to be a game changer in a number of sectors in which we are already working with. Things like deploying ultra low latency applications, for instance, in different of these many of these sectors, and improving this kind of user experience or end users experience. That's something we are witnessing across the different markets in which we're working. Things like expanding service availability, being able to react to incidents maybe in your infrastructure. So that's something we're also looking forward to incorporate that as a main principle. Obviously, reducing data transfers and security risks associated with those transfers, minimizing vendor dependency. That's also an important aspect for us, kind of part of our multi-cloud approach, as Marco will explain in a second. Hopefully, as you already mentioned, seeing or let's see the promise that the edge computing is also bringing along of being able to reduce also energy consumption, not only for associated with those data transfers, but also for the infrastructure itself. And we also see in a European context how edge computing can be able to foster a new, stronger local ecosystem of infrastructure providers, smaller infrastructure providers as well. And in that way also kind of strengthen Europe's digital sovereignty, which is, as you know, the cloud market now comes with deep imbalances and very high entry barriers for some operators. And in that sense, as we'll explain today, one of our objectives is to help as much as possible to bring and speed up these targets that the Commission has expressed a few weeks ago. In particular, the one that involves the being able to have by 2030 10,000 climate neutral highly secure edge nodes across Europe, which, as we understand, involves facilitating for new companies and new investors the solutions and the technology they need to actually deploy this infrastructure across Europe. So we'll explain how we are planning to do that, and we are actually already testing our technology in that environment for the specific use case. also as a way to, as I mentioned, bring some competitiveness to the market and increase or at least decrease our dependency or European dependencies on non-European technologies. So, Marco, all yours.
Oh, okay, thanks, Alberto. So let's move to explain the technology that we have developed in the last 13 years, and especially in the last 2-3 years in OpenNebula. So OpenNebula is a simple and easy open source solution in order not to build and manage enterprise clouds. So we started as a solution for on-premise, for private clouds, and with the technology of virtual machine. And in the last years, as I already said, we moved to also integrating application containers, technologies, and clearly also Kubernetes clusters. So this is from the point of view of workloads. So we now can manage and orchestrate with a uniform layer all these kind of workloads. The second aspect that we research and we developed is also on the infrastructure from the infrastructure point of view, where we moved from the on-premise or private data center to the cloud, public cloud, and the edge also infrastructure. So you can see OpenNebula is as a uniform management layer where you can both manage different kind of infrastructure and different kind of workloads in an easy way. So in order to reduce resource consumption, you avoid vendor lock-in, and the other important aspect is you minimize complexity because you have just one uniform layer, one abstraction of resources, and also you reduce operating costs. So from the technology point of view, we have considered different integrated different kind of virtualization technologies. As I said, from the virtual machines where we integrate KVM and VMware, to system containers with LXC, and in the latest, one of the latest release also micro VMs provided by the Firecrack technology, that is a technology that has been built by Amazon Web Services in order to deploy especially container that where we use for deploying especially container-based application. Also, OpenNebula is integrated with different third-party tools. So Terraform, as I said, also Kubernetes clusters, Ansible, and Docker. And then we provide also some tools like Sandstone and in the latest release, FireEdge, in order that are graphical user interface to manage resources, both on-premise, on the edge, and all the workloads. So OpenNebula has integrated all these technologies in an environment that is multi-tenancy, self-service, so with all the features that in order to provide an enterprise cloud. Okay, let's move first on the containers, because this was one of the latest development in OpenNebula. First of all, now we have a sort of native model, container native model that provides like a container as a service within OpenNebula, because we have integrated a Docker Hub and Firecracker. So here what the user can do is to deploy application-based containers as micro VMs, and he can deploy easily on-premise or on different resources that are just seen as computational resources. In this way, you don't need to provide the first some Dockerized host or Kubernetes clusters, but you use just your Docker image and you can just deploy as a micro VM. Micro VM is very fast with respect to traditional virtual machines, but has the same features in terms of security. So you have isolated environments to deploy containers. That's something that we have as a native. It's not an alternative, it could be, but can be used for different use cases where you really don't need a Kubernetes cluster or you have to provide infrastructure before deploying your containerized application or service. But in OpenNebula, we provide also the integration with Kubernetes. We have two appliances. So we have an appliance for the standard Kubernetes distribution, and we have another appliance for K3S, that is a lightweight distribution for Kubernetes, and it is specially designed for the edge and for the IoT. Also, K3S at the moment can also, as a feature, in order to be, you can self-register your K3S clusters and with a Ranger deployment, and then you can manage applications by using a Ranger. So this is how we integrate application containers, within OpenNebula. Okay, now let's move to the edge part. So OpenNebula, with the latest release, Mutara, has really moved towards this kind of concept where we provide resources anywhere. So we have we take a sort of opportunistic approach with also resources that are provided by third-party providers, and we integrate also resources that can be whatever in the continuum, let's say. So that could be on public clouds, on the edge clouds, or it could be on telco 5G edge, on on-premise edge, and also on IoT devices, could be like trains or could be IoT devices. And this can be integrated and can be seen as resources within OpenNebula. And this is integrated within our uniform layer. So we still keep all the features that we have, like multi-tenancy, the self-service, workload isolation, elasticity roles. For example, we have other technologies like OneFlow that provides also in order to deploy multi-container applications, and then use also elasticity and other features. So the idea is that with OpenNebula and using especially the One Provision tool, you can add on demand other resources that could be on-premise, could be on the public cloud, could be on the far edge, like, for example, a train with devices. So if you can go on the other slide, this is, for example, a use case with that we have considered in order, for example, to deploy Kubernetes clusters on the far edge, on trains, on some devices, and how this works. So we have one tool that is called FireEdge, is the graphical user interface, where you can use different drivers, so you have a catalog of providers, and we can integrate different kind of resources. So for example, we have a provider for AWS, we have a provider for DigitalOcean and Google Cloud, and so on. We have also a provider for on-premise. So in order just to register resources that, for example, you have hardware resources that could be, for example, on a train or IoT devices. So you register this kind of resources as a cluster, as OpenNebula cluster, and then you can see these resources within your deployment, okay? And then we can use the Sandstone graphical user interface in order to deploy applications or clusters or Kubernetes clusters, like, for example, K3S. And this is in a seamless way because it's just, you just have to specify on which cluster you would like to provide, but it's the same appliance, it's the same application. So what we have done is, in this use case, is we can provide K3S clusters on these edge resources that self-register on Ranger, and then we just deploy applications on these remote resources, for example. Okay, so this gives an idea of how OpenNebula has evolved now from on-premise or private clouds to really reach the edge. You can find different resources. We have white papers, we have webinars. One of the recent ones was this about European open source for next generation edge clouds that you can find the recording, the webinar recorded online. And you can find different other resources, screencasts on our website that you can find on the for Edge for the Edge. The latest release is Mutara. You can try this new release, so you can really deploy in very few minutes a fully functional OpenNebula cloud. So for the evaluation, for the product evaluation. So you can deploy from Zend, for example, on VMware or KVM. You can also automatically deploy OpenNebula Edge clusters on AWS or Equinix or other kind of providers. And then you can learn these cloud operations by having this deployment, and then you can deploy by using the marketplace that comes with OpenNebula, where you can find different appliances, like I said, Kubernetes clusters or other appliances you can find, and then you can deploy anywhere on your edge and your cloud deployment. I think, I don't know, Albert, if there is anything else.
Nope, that's all.
It's okay. 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 Thanks for your attention, and
thank you.
Thank you.
Federico, I think you are muted.
Indeed. Again, thanks, Marco. Thanks, Alberto. And I'm happy to introduce the next presenter, Kurt, which will talk us about the cloud sovereign stack.
Yeah, thanks, Federico. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, and we also see
Works
your
good.
Okay, that's great. And you see the slides, so we're all set for a successful 20 minutes. I'm trying to stop on time, so we have some time left at the end for discussion, which I'm really interested in. Just to introduce myself, Kurt Galloff, my name. I've been working in the open source world for all of my professional life. Started with contributing to the Linux kernel, built up SUSE Labs, which was a real fun thing to do. And then later on turned to building clouds. Maybe best known cloud I was involved in was being the chief architect for the Open Telecom Cloud, which is a quite significant cloud here in Europe. The reason I'm here is that I am working on a project called Sovereign Cloud Stack, where within Gaia X, we are building an open source cloud and container stack. When I say build, and of course, that means we are trying to get the relevant groups together to build a joint open source project on based on existing open source technology, of course. We're doing this as a small project, and with the funding we have in place, we now run this out of the Open Source Business Alliance, which is a business association for open source companies in German-speaking countries. Just to motivate what we are doing, so there's an observation I guess many people share, that is that we have quite dominant position of the hyperscalers in the cloud market. And that is something that we do not consider to be a really good situation, because the dependencies this creates really has economic, strategic, and legal challenges for companies, research institutes, also for the public sector, when they want to adopt modern IT technology, cloud. And this is something that we believe we should contribute to being overcome, and that of course fits nicely into the work that's been done in Gaia X. And what we are observing is that this dominance really has created a lot of centralized control, and that control also is happening outside of Europe. So also something that our economy in Europe is needs to be worried about is that value creation moves outside of Europe with such a situation. Now looking at open source, and I said I've done this all of my life, I think that all the building blocks that we need to build alternatives actually are available. And actually, if you look at what's out there, most of them are in reasonable quality, in reasonable maturity. But in the end, Putting all those pieces together, hundreds of software projects very often, is something that is a complex task. And what we are observing is that we see, talking to many companies, talking to research institutes, talking to cloud providers, they all do this work on their own. So they're using those existing open source building blocks, putting them together on their own, and then build up, and that's actually the more complex part, build up the automation and the practices to actually operate and run such a stack. That's something that is very hard. And given that this is really distributed over a large number of small teams, there's a lot of duplication of effort involved in that. And that's something that has not yet been successful in creating a good alternative to those hyperscaler offerings. Also, I mean, if you look at the outcome of these stacks, while they look somewhat similar very often, they also tend to not be fully compatible to each other. So also the ecosystem that is built around such a world is not as successful as it should be. So what we're really trying to do is trying to build a network of all of those teams that we find in companies, in research institutes, and trying to network them together, building the software together. As I said, a lot of that is already available. So that's the classical open source approach, but then also work together on building the practices to operate such stacks, the automation, the operational tooling, the operational processes. So we call this open operations. Just to map this to Gaia X, this is a picture I think you have seen before. The X in Gaia X really having the mission of building a sovereign infrastructure ecosystem and a sovereign data ecosystem. At the bottom of the X, you see the infrastructure piece. That is where the provider working group of the Gaia X project is actually mostly involved. And that's also where we as a project are being attached to Gaia X as an open work package inside this provider working group. And then on the top, you see the projects that are more concerned with exchanging of data hubs. And that's the user group that's mostly focusing on that. And then in the middle, the federation services are supposed to create necessary policies and infrastructure and technology to keep the whole ecosystem together. Just to quickly explain how you could benefit from participating in Sovereign Cloud Stack. There is, towards Gaia X, obviously, we provide one option that you as a infrastructure provider or node provider, as is the term being used in the Gaia X world, an option to get a fully open, fully trustable software stack that you can use to become a Gaia X node provider. And we're working with the groups that deliver the self-descriptions and work on the descriptions for that. So it will be fairly straightforward for you to participate in that way. There's two different possibilities that you can use to participate in Sovereign Cloud Stack and to benefit from that. One is obviously, we do have a definition of what we consider standards. So, I mean, the outcome of building such a stack will be well defined. There's well-defined standards, how the interfaces look like, how the system behavior is looking like, what kind of quality and security expectations need to be fulfilled. And based on that, you can take the decision, okay, I want to build my own cloud and container stack, and I want to make sure I can be part of the ecosystem. So I want to certify to comply to those specifications. So you run the conformance tests that we provide, and you work with us to make sure the standards are actually working well. And then, of course, that does increase your ecosystem. So I think that gives you like 20 or 25% of the value that we can provide. The other 75% you can actually get by using most or maybe even all of what we work on together in Sovereign Cloud Stack to deliver a software stack. So you can adopt that, you can adopt the modules that you want, but you can also adopt it as a whole. So we have the, we are delivering a complete stack, but it's modular. So you can take the pieces you need. And by doing so, you save a lot of work on building the architecture, on curating good open source projects, on trying to find implementation partners that can help your clients to actually successfully deploy such environments. You can save a lot of work on testing. And last not least, I would say the operational challenge is the bigger half of the challenge. You do benefit from the shared operational practices and the tooling that we put in place and that we document well. So you don't need to build up that all on your own. I mean, this results really in a commoditization of the lower layers of the infrastructure. Just to give you a short view on the project status, we are a fairly young project. I mean, we started to really work on the ideas of this in the end of 2019. And then in 2020, we quickly were becoming part of the Gaia X project and joined as a sub-working group in that project. And we also were lucky enough to receive some funding from the German Agency for Disruptive Innovation, Sprung Innovation, which allowed a few of us to get some payments while we're working on building up this project. We're now waiting for a grant from the BMWI, the German Ministry for Economy and Energy, that will allow us to fund the work for the next 3.5 to 4 years. So that's, and that project then is inside the Open Source Business Alliance, where we really hire a dozen people that will coordinate the whole project and work with the partners. We also have a bit of money then to fund some of the work that the community may not do on its own. By and large, actually, we do live on contributions from volunteers. So cloud service providers, big companies that have internal cloud teams, a few individuals or freelancers actually are working with us at this point. And I just counted in the last team meetings, we were 24 engineers that were participating in the discussions and contributing code and documents and issues and pull requests. We have a couple of companies that are working with us. You see some logos here. I guess inside this group here, Stack HPC probably will be well known. And actually, 2 of the companies listed here already have been starting to offer public clouds based on Sovereign Cloud Stack code. This is Better Cloud Solutions and Plus Server. And we're working with a few other partners like City Network and OVH, Telecom, to actually work on their environment, test on their environment, and see where we can maybe align the interfaces, get this compatibility at the interface layer, but then also see if there are certain technologies that we can share and work on together. There's a few companies that we're working with which are not listed here, so I do not have permission from all the companies we're working with to use their logos. We have some big industry companies that traditionally are more secretive of this kind of collaborations. But this is actually rather important projects for us as well. We're also looking for a 3rd public cloud launch very soon. So it's growing nicely. And one of the things that came a bit surprising to us is that we have actually a lot of interest from public sector IT providers. There is currently quite some energy being invested there to modernize those public IT providers, and they are actually very interested to work with Sovereign Cloud Stack. From a technology implementation perspective, we are building the stack from the bottom up. So we start with some infrastructure automation, virtualization for network, compute, and storage, have an infrastructure as a service layer on top of that. And those pieces are actually in a very good shape. That's also what's being used in Plus Server and Meta Clouds. And currently, most of the work, current ongoing development work, goes into automating the container layer. What we're really doing there is not just offering one container cluster that customers can use, but really a Kubernetes cluster as a service. So via API, we're using the Kubernetes cluster API there. Customers can spin up their own container clusters, run them, or consume them as a managed service with some support from the service provider, and have a complete Kubernetes ecosystem. And using the isolation technology from the underlying cloud, this actually makes this a very dynamic, also very secure model of operating container clusters. We're actually right now in process of releasing the code we already have, and then looking towards a large release in September, which includes all those container pieces then in production quality. Right now, some of this is technical preview. This gives you a view on how we see the ecosystem around us evolving. So the Sovereign Cloud Stack project at the Open Source Business Alliance is fairly small. We are really in there to coordinate, orchestrate the work from our partners, from the communities, from the users, and make sure we bring all those parties together. And then around us, there is companies that have business models that allows them to offer commercial support, to offer training, to offer implementation services, consulting, for the cloud service providers, also for the companies that are using Sovereign Cloud Stack internally, same obviously for public administration. And this is closely connected to GaiaX. We're working very closely with the Federation Services project, where we support as being a development platform, and also then using the combined work of our project and GaiaX Federation Services to validate the overall architecture. And of course, we're closely connected to the upstream communities, be it from CNCF or the Open Infrastructure Foundation, or the Linux vendors that, of course, also are working in this space. I'll jump over this so we have some time left at the end. I already outlined our roadmap, so I'll jump over this. Maybe for those that are interested in technology, to give you a quick view on how the stack looks like. I described this with a few words already. Starting from the bottom, we virtualize compute, storage, and network with the usual suspects in the open source world that you would use there: KVM virtualization, Ceph for storage, Open vSwitch OVN for the network virtualization. And as said, this is a modular architecture. So this is the reference implementation that we do and that we test every day when we do the automated deployments. But our partners can take the decision to take a slightly different approach and, for example, use some other storage technology if they prefer to do so. On top of the infrastructure virtualization, we have the infrastructure as a service layer. We're using the core components of OpenStack here mostly to expose these. And then we have a nicely defined abstraction layer to automate the container layer on top of that, using the Kubernetes cluster API and providing a full service Kubernetes stack on top of that. Important, on the left side, you see some of the operational tools, standardizing these, automating things like monitoring and having best practice in place. How to run such a stack is one of those things that if you look at whatever offerings from Linux distributors, that they typically do not have in scope as much. So this is one of the things where we definitely provide value that is required by real world cloud operators. And it's not a surprised, because I mean, we come out of the cloud operator world and really work very closely. Our community is mostly built on these. On the right-hand side, important to us, federation is a key feature of the stack, making sure we can do user federation and also have federated role and identity management in place. So this is something that in our vision, seeing the world as many small edge and data center cloud, being able to connect and to federate into a larger virtual cloud, of course, means that federation is a key aspect of the work we're doing. If you want to try it out, we have something called the Testbed Deployment, where on top of an existing infrastructure as a service platform, you can actually do a double virtualized deployment. This is something we're using on a daily basis for demos, for testing, for running our CI. And it is being implemented exactly the same way as you would do a physical deployment. Of course, for production use, you would do physical deployments. There's a lot of documentation available. I included some links. Again, all of what we do, of course, is fully open source. We believe in open source, we believe in open communities, and really appreciate the work that the Eclipse Foundation is doing in that space. And of course, we're working closely together also with the Open Infrastructure Foundation and the CNCF. I'll stop here, so we have a bit of time left for discussions.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Kurt.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kurt. Thanks a lot to all the participants. This is in the few left time, what I propose is to take few questions. I don't know if anyone in the audience want to start. If not, I have a few questions for you guys.
Don't be shy.
So one of my, I mean, you know, we are working on identifying needs for future development in the field. And so one of our, of course, main interest is to gather your point of view on the matter. So understand what you think are the current gaps in the open source solution, and that need to be filled, and eventually who you think is also an actor that is going to work on the gaps.
Yeah, I could start if people don't mind with my view on this. Federico, I think the main challenge we have is not that we lack specific key technologies as good open source implementations, but I think what we really lack is a great way of combining and integrating all those technologies into a coherent stack that can be used. And then this is the prerequisite from my perspective to really have a good ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem, where companies then can build software on top, where you can have like support and consulting offerings around. I think fragmentation is what the open source community is really suffering in the cloud and container space.
Thanks a lot, Kurt. I don't know if Alberto and Marco want to add anything.
Yeah, I think that's a good point Kurt's making. I mean, from a European perspective, I think we have a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of resources that have been invested in research and development projects, a lot of capabilities in European universities and companies. We need just to go cover that kind of last mile and putting this together and making sure that funding opportunities, for instance, and opportunities for collaboration are not designed as something that's only temporary, but something that can embody that kind of interest in, and the need we have for sustainable technological solutions. And in that sense, I think it's putting people together from many different sides. I think that, I mean, in that sense, I think what the European Commission is proposing for Horizon Europe, for instance, is very, very interesting, right? The calls that are now for building a meta operating system for the cloud edge continuum involve, or have to involve, competitors, have to involve organizations from different sizes, and have to respond to actual needs. I think that's a good step. And Gaia-X and the IPSI project are also good signs in that sense.
Well,
Thanks.
okay.
Yeah, please, Marco.
Just no.
Hear from Brian as well, possibly.
Okay. Well, I mean, technology is there. There is a lot of technology that we have today. So I agree with Kurt when he says that we really need more integration and also less fragmentation. But integration means also understanding how to build this kind of integration with the different technologies, and also having maybe doing this kind of integration, doing also innovation, because integrating different technologies that exist means maybe a new tool or a new technology that comes up during this integration. I mean, Docker was an integration of different tools that already exist and put in a way that revolutionized our way of deploying and develop. It's what was a new tool, but was an integration of different tools that already exist. That's my opinion. When I say integration, means also towards innovation, and that means having also different models of deployments, and that can come up. And Europe can do this also, in my opinion, because there are capabilities and a lot of fundings, a lot of opportunities also to collaborate with different research institutes, research and industry together, especially in the new programs that are now available also in Europe. Okay, that was a quick one.
Thank you, Marco. Brian, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so, I apologies, I may have missed a question, but, from catching everybody's replies, it's about, integration and innovation in the European context. And I think the Eclipse Foundation, obviously, the way we work models that, we're all about collaboration, we're all about integration, and in particular around the tools that we're building now. Integration is key. We've also kind of doubled down our commitment to Europe by last year registering as a European foundation. So, even though we're still a global foundation, our center of gravity has moved a little bit towards Europe. We're now registered as an AISBL in Belgium. So we're collaborating on the Gaia-X project and various other H-Cloud and various other initiatives, and we're committed to that moving forward.
Thanks a lot. I mean, I'm also curious about other aspects, and for example, I mean, in my view, clearly there is a set of ecosystem that are becoming more and more the center of gravity of what is happening in the cloud space, and now even toward the edge. And this is clearly the case for the Kubernetes ecosystem. But on the other side, I mean, I think it's is also the risk of thinking everything around Kubernetes. It's also a limitation, especially if you think to what is, for example, in the vision of the Commission called for edge. Because you are talking about devices that are not meant to host a Kubernetes cluster, and doing that might end up basically delivering something that is not working properly. So clearly you want to have something transparent, and from this point of view, Kubernetes is great because it gives you an abstraction on infrastructures, right? You can have it on Amazon, you can have it on wherever, and you can combine Amazon and whatever other provider in a distributed or federated Kubernetes cluster. But then when you come to the integration of what you can call for a far edge, you need to find other paths probably, because I don't see yet this very well handled inside the running project like KubeEdge or like Micro KS or like K3S. These still require not such a small hardware like can be an embedded device on a sensor level. So I don't know if you have anything to say on that. And then maybe we see if someone from the public want to raise his hand.
May I? Okay,
Sure, Marco, please.
Someone else, I don't know. Okay. Well, I mean, Kubernetes really improved a lot. There was a gap, in deploying containers, so that because if we rely only on Docker, we couldn't have this kind of orchestration of containers. That's what Kubernetes solves. But at the same time, when you have Kubernetes, so you have a very, I want to say, an infrastructure that you have to manage again. As already maybe I said during my talk, maybe very quickly, there could be different kind of the deployments, like we did in OpenNebula by using micro VMs and containers, as you can see also in other providers like AWS with Fargate or other kind of technologies that you really don't need to have an infrastructure in order to deploy a container-based application. I mean, this depends a lot on the use cases. And as you said, in the far edge, we really need such an infrastructure in order to deploy maybe an application. That's depend, in my opinion, depends a lot on the use case. So there are some use cases where why should I have to build an orchestrator on top of some virtualization, a lot of infrastructure in order just to deploy an application? Okay, maybe there is no need for that. Maybe in other cases, instead, you need that because Kubernetes provides so many tools that you really need that kind of, that's, I think, could be the case in order maybe to provide some other deployment. K3S, like also micro Kubernetes and other deployments that are smaller in terms of footprint and it requires less resources. But at the end, you need still resources, storage to deploy a Kubernetes cluster more than the application. No? You need other resources where you just have to deploy your infrastructure to deploy the application instead of relying just on, for example, a device that you deploy on the far edge where you can deploy your application. So I think there could be something that could be different from Kubernetes. Is de facto standard for the deployment multi-container applications because you have all the tools that allow you to deploy. And you have also an ecosystem that is now built around Kubernetes. So it's something that you have to take into account in order to not, how to say, develop or waste time in developing some stuff that is already developed. But I think there could be other deployment, especially on the edge, as you said, that could be different from having just so much infrastructure to manage just an application on a device.
Yeah, I agree with Marco that the use case is crucial, right? And I think the important thing when you're building a solution or a platform is to keep it kind of platform agnostic as much as possible and make sure that you can kind of plug in other architectures and other solutions. Like I can't speak to the IoT and edge use case, but in the case of cloud software development tools, with our Eclipse project, that's currently very heavily focused on the Kubernetes. It's Kubernetes native solution. And that was a conscious decision actually by Red Hat, one of the large adopters of the Che projects and one of the key drivers of development of the project. But lately we've had other adopters come in, large cloud providers who are saying, we want to use this tool, but we don't want Kubernetes deployment. We want to run in other types of containers, or we want to Docker compose locally, right? And it turns out that the project is flexible enough to allow for these solutions, and it provides a configuration standard that, you know, launching different cloud configurations is as easy as just you know, a configuration file. So the key is really in how it's architected, I think, your solution.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. And I don't know if Kurt want to add anything.
Yeah, just maybe one point. I'm not so worried about Kubernetes being too heavyweight for edge scenarios. I'm a bit worried that the complexity that it incurs to run a full Kubernetes cluster might be too much for some of the scenarios. So keeping things simple is one of the rules that you'll learn when you're in IT. Keep it as simple as possible. I think one of the powerful things though that Kubernetes brings is a very, very stringent use of having a declarative description of what your infrastructure should be, and then having this reconciliation loop that kind of makes sure that reality matches what the descriptive file says. And I think that is a pattern we will see if we start building a new, more lightweight replacement for maybe the edge. I would expect to see that pattern again. So that's something very powerful that I think we will take as a learning as an IT industry.
Thanks a lot. I don't know if anyone else want to give a chance to our speakers to provide their view on open source related challenges in the cloud space. Okay, I think unless we have any question coming up, I wish again to thank you all of you, and I think it was a very interesting discussion, and I think we would like to have eventually some like follow-up, maybe have a sort of white paper discussing these aspects. And if you think this is an interesting follow-up and we can engage other actors around that, then I will discuss how to kick off this type of action. Of course, again, if this is something you think you are interested in to contribute and that has a value for you and for the community. Okay, thanks again, everyone, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much. Yeah. And thank you for putting this event together. Yeah.
Thanks for joining.